Hello, and welcome to our latest video in our Stories from the Strongrooms series. Today, I'd like to take you on a tour of 1920s Hull. All the photographs in this video are from the Claude Jamson Photographic Archive, which is held by Hull University Archives at the Hull History Centre. These amazing photographs of Hull provide fascinating glimpses of Hull and life in the city during the Roaring Twenties. But first, I want to introduce you to the Jamson family and their patriarch, William Jamson. William Jamson, seen here seated on the right, started his professional life as a machine fitter before branching out into photography. He established his first photography business with his brother in Liverpool, but the two soon went their separate ways, and after moves to Warrington and Burnley, William settled in Nottingham in 1902 when he began to produce his first postcards. At this time, a photographer's success was determined by his ability to persuade ordinary people to have photographic portraits taken. After William moved again to Sheffield in the early 1900s, he called himself the outdoor photo specialist. Considering his choice of name, it is possible that he specialised in photographing people in their own homes, in their gardens, or in front of their homes or businesses, rather than his own studio. Sadly, there are no examples of his photographic portraits in the archive. William made his final move to Doncaster in 1909, setting up as Jay's Photographic Publishing Company, and employed a young photographer called Walter Allen Roerlich. The company produced topographical postcards of the surrounding area, as well as portraits and group photographs. A few years after joining, Roerlich married William's daughter Ava, seen here in the middle of the back row, and later left the business to form his own company. Shortly after the outbreak of the First World War, William Jamson, realising the potential demand for postcard portraits of soldiers to send back to wives and sweethearts, acquired a mobile studio and took to the road. Jamson went from army camp to army camp photographing soldiers. At this time, Roerlich, who was prevented from joining the army on medical grounds, returned to the business and took over the running of the Doncaster studio. With the end of the war, the tours of the army camps ended. The business now focused on the production of topographical postcards. With this in mind, a Grader rotary photographic printing machine was purchased, which was able to produce large numbers of postcards in long runs. A new limited company was then formed, the Doncaster Roto Photo Company. Many of the Jamson family became involved in the new company. William Jamson and Walter Roerlich were the photographers. William's son Reginald, back row on the right, was the general manager, whilst Reginald's brother Claude, back row on the left, and his sister Ivy, front row second from left, also began to work for the company. The first series of photographs produced was of Doncaster, quickly followed by other places in the immediate locality. By mid-1920, approximately 300 series had been produced, including some for towns and villages in North Staffordshire, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire and Nottingham. For each town or village, a variety of views were produced. Many of the series produced were of small villages, and the profit made from these postcards would have been very small. Larger towns were potentially more profitable, and some were visited several times, with new cards being added to existing series. Later, the company began to produce series for places even further afield, including popular holiday resorts in various parts of the country, probably in a bid to increase profits. Sadly though, William Jamson died in November 1920, and the fortunes of a struggling company declined further. Walter Roerlich and Claude Jamson left in 1921 to set up their own company, and Norman Jamson, who took over as a photographer, was left with the business making a significant loss. The business was forced to close in 1923 when their main supplier withdrew their credit. Norman and Reginald Jamson then established a new postcard publishing company, Don Lion, in 1924, which retained the manual printing machines, but not the Graber rotary machine. Don Lion also acquired the Doncaster Roto Photo Company's negatives. Walter Roerlich, who had married William Jamson's daughter, had a son, Claude William Jamson. Claude also became a photographer, and by 1929 had moved to Hessel. He continued working as a photographer and postcard producer until at least the Second World War. Now we have all the introductions out of the way, Let's see how William Jamson and his family captured Hull in the 1920s. The city centre of 1920s Hull was very different to today. Major shopping centres like Prince's Quay, St Stephen's and the Prospect Centre were decades away, and Queen's Gardens was still a dock. The Wilberforce statue was in its original position on Monument Bridge, and trams were a major form of public transport. The bombing suffered by Hull in the Second World War also significantly altered the architectural landscape, with landmarks such as the Prudential Building being completely destroyed. Taken from the direction of Monument Bridge, looking towards the Queen Victoria statue, this photograph shows the City Hall and the Prudential Building. The tram lines and cables in the square are also clearly visible. This photograph was taken looking down Queen Street towards the statue of King William III and Holy Trinity, now Hull Minster. Queen Street was a bustling shopping street with shops lining both sides of the wide road. And this photograph was taken from the top of Whitefrigate, looking towards the Wilberforce Monument and the back of what was the dock offices, now the Maritime Museum. The Wilberforce statue is visible on the left in its original position. It stood here next to Prince's Quay Dock until the 1930s, when it started making traffic flow very difficult following a new road layout. The monument now stands at the end of Queen's Gardens in front of Hull College. This image is of King Edward Street looking towards City Square from the junction with Jamson Street. It shows the Delapole statue, well, the back of the statue, which was removed in 1922. The statue is currently enjoying the views of Nelson Street, next to the Humber. By the 1920s, Hull had long been a major port for trading and fishing. These industries suffered much disruption during the First World War and continued to suffer some difficulties in the 1920s. Despite this, Hull retained its status as Britain's third port, and the fishing industry expanded considerably during the interwar years. This photograph is of Queen's Dock looking across the dock towards the dock offices. Queen's Dock was the original dock in Hull, initially known as simply the dock, and later the Old Dock, when newer docks were constructed. It was only after a visit by Queen Victoria that it acquired its current name. The dock was filled in between 1930 and 1934 to create Queen's Gardens. This almost aerial photograph is of King George Dock. King George Dock was opened, unsurprisingly given its name, by King George V in June 1914 and was built as a competitor to the Great Central Dock just across the estuary in Immingham. It was designed by the eminent engineer Sir Benjamin Baker and was the first fully electrified dock in the country. The Hull to Rotterdam and later Hull to Zeebrugge roll-on roll-off ferry services began from this dock in 1965. Victoria Dock was opened in 1850 and was the first dock to be built on the east side of the River Hull. The dock operated for 120 years, closing in February 1970 and later being developed into the dockland village we know today. As you can see from this photograph, it was a thriving port in the 1920s. St Andrews was opened in 1883 with the intention of it being used by the coal trade. Instead, it was used entirely by the fishing industry and was often referred to as simply the fish dock. The fishing industry was moved to Albert Dock in 1972 and St Andrews was closed only 3 years later. This photograph shows Victoria Pier, originally named Corporation Pier, until it was renamed after a visit by the Queen in 1854. The pier was used by the Humber Ferry until the ferry service ended in 1985, following the successful completion of the Humber Bridge in 1981, an altogether quicker route across the Humber. Hull's parks have been central to the city's cultural and leisure offerings since the first public park, Pearson Park, as shown in this photograph, opened in 1862. Before this, the only parks in the city were the Botanic Gardens and the Hull Zoological Gardens, both of which charged entrance fees. The beginning of the 20th century saw the opening of new parks and the expansion of older parks to provide greater and more varied leisure facilities. Pearson Park was created on land gifted by the ship owner and at the time notable civic figure Zachariah Pearson. Many of the trees were acquired from the recently closed Hull Zoological Gardens. This photograph shows the stone bridge above what has become known as the Khyber Pass in East Park. East Park was opened in 1887 to serve the eastern part of the city. A boating lake was added in 1913, extended in 1923, and a double-arch bridge was erected in 1925. Today it's a great place to take the kids, where they can see the animals and run around until they're exhausted. Boating lakes, like this one in Pickering Park, were all the rage in the early decades of the 20th century, particularly with the working classes. Pickering Park was opened in 1911 on land gifted by Christopher Pickering. It was the first home of the town's Museum of Fisheries and Shipping, which later became the Hull Maritime Museum. Following the First World War, a major slum clearance and rehousing scheme was carried out, with over 2,800 houses being replaced by 1939. New housing estates were built in the suburbs. New streets were also considered, including what eventually became Ferrens Way, which finally opened in 1931. Other major roads, such as Springbank and Holderness Road, continued as before, serving as the main arteries into Hull and as significant shopping districts in their own right, outside of the city centre. This photograph of Holderness Road shows the Savoy Cinema on the right. The cinema was the location of the last bombing of Hull during the Second World War, when 12 people were killed and 22 injured, many of whom were exiting the cinema at the end of a film showing. This photograph shows new houses in Lakeside Grove, Gypsyville. Gypsyville had started life as a housing and factory development at the beginning of the 1900s. During the post-war rehousing scheme of the 1920s, over 1,000 houses were added to the estate. Civic pride has always been a key part of Hull's city identity. Civic institutions and architecture greatly benefited from Hull's position as a major trading and manufacturing centre during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Several institutions were also the direct beneficiaries of generous donations by local businessmen and dignitaries, including Ferrens Art Gallery and the University of Hull. This photograph shows one of the first buildings on the University College of Hull campus. The University College opened in 1927 following a considerable donation by T.R. Ferrens and with support from the City Corporation. The college was granted a Royal Charter in 1954, becoming the 14th university in England. One of the most important buildings in Hull, this photograph shows the Guildhall, which was finished in 1907, replacing the old Town Hall. It was built to include law courts, a council chamber and offices, and still functions as Hull City Council's headquarters. And this photograph shows the Royal Infirmary in Prospect Street. Established originally in George Street in 1782, the infirmary moved to Prospect Street only a few years later in 1784. It was renamed Hull Royal Infirmary in 1884 and moved to its current location on Anlaby Road in the 1950s. I hope you've enjoyed this quick tour of 1920s Hull. I've put a link in the description to the collection's online catalogue if you'd like to know more about the collection and its photographs. Thanks for watching, and please keep an eye out for our next Stories from the Strongroom video, which will be available next month.